For a generation of Americans, there are two films that never really leave you. One plays every time a familiar song comes on the radio. The other returns quietly, late at night. When the house is still. Before the awards, before the rumors, before the headlines, there was a man who moved differently. Not louder. Not faster. Just more honestly. Patrick Swayze didn't just perform on screen. He carried rhythm in his posture. Pain in his pauses. Discipline in the way he stood still. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, his face was everywhere. Dirty Dancing turned him into a cultural moment. Ghost turned him into a memory people held on to. He was nominated. Admired. Desired. Yet somehow, never fully crowned by the industry that profited from him. Behind the elegance and confidence lived something far less polished. A body pushed past its limits. Habits that refused to loosen their grip. A private battle that grew quietly while the spotlight stayed bright. And when the music finally stopped, it wasn't scandal that defined his ending. It was time. It was illness. It was the cost of carrying everything alone. So the question isn't why we remember him. The question is what we missed while we were watching him dank. Long before the cameras found him, the rhythm came from a small dance studio in Houston, Texas. The mirrors were old. The floors were worn. But the discipline was absolute. This was the world shaped by Patsy Swayze. A woman who believed movement was not a hobby but a language. Patrick was surrounded by it from the time he could walk. Ballet shoes lined the walls. Music filled the room from morning until evening. While other children went home after class, he stayed. He watched. He learned. He absorbed timing, posture, and control before he understood what those words meant. Dance was not the only thing in his life. He played football. Ran track. Skated. Swam. He led school plays. Played the violin. Sang in the choir. On the surface, he looked like the kind of all-American boy Texas celebrated. But ballet followed him everywhere, and not everyone was kind about it. In high school, that difference made him a target. 5 boys mocked him for dancing. The teasing turned physical. What followed became a defining moment. His father demanded the bullies face him one at a time. Patrick fought them all. He won. Not because he was cruel, but because he was trained. He had studied martial arts. Control had already been carved into his body. His mother was strict. Sometimes frighteningly so. Years later, Patrick would say she pushed him because that was the only way she knew how. She came from abuse herself. In her mind, strength was survival. That pressure left marks that never fully faded. As graduation approached, football seemed like the future. Then came the injury. A shattered leg. Reconstructive surgery. One dream ended quietly, without ceremony. Another opened in its place. A gymnastics scholarship followed, then an unexpected call to tour as Prince Charming with Disney on parade. College was left behind. The road called louder. New York came next. Ballet training at Joffrey and Harkness. Long days. Small apartments. Constant pain. And then, the moment that changed everything. A dental infection entered his bloodstream. It traveled to the leg already weakened by surgery. Doctors discussed amputation. They saved the leg. But the verdict was final. His ballet career was over. Years of discipline ended in a hospital room. Most people would have walked away. Patrick turned sideways. If ballet was closed, theater was open. He shifted toward Broadway. Good Time Charlie. Chicago. West Side Story. Each role reshaped him, not as a dancer, but as a storyteller who spoke with his entire body. Around this time, he reconnected with Lisa Niemi, someone who understood both the cost and the calling. She had trained in the same world. She knew what it meant to lose yourself to movement. Hollywood was still far away. Fame wasn't promised. But something solid had formed. Not confidence. Not certainty. Something quieter. A man who already knew how to stand after losing the thing he loved most. Hollywood did not happen overnight. It arrived in fragments. Small roles. Television appearances. Long stretches where recognition felt close but never certain. Then, in the late 1980s, everything aligned. When Patrick Swayze stepped into Dirty Dancing, he wasn't just cast. He was tested. The role demanded grace and toughness in the same breath. It required a man who could lead without dominating. Dance without softness turning fragile. Few actors could do that. He could. The production was tense. Long rehearsals. Physical strain. Old injuries resurfacing. He fell repeatedly during practice. His knee swelled. Pain followed him home each night. But the camera never saw it. What audiences saw was control. Confidence. Chemistry that felt unplanned. When the film was released, it didn't creep into culture. It exploded. Made on a modest budget, it returned more than anyone expected. Women returned to theaters again and again. The soundtrack became a constant presence in American homes. Patrick was no longer just an actor. He was a symbol. Yet fame brought a trap. Hollywood wanted him frozen in place. The dancer. The romantic lead. The safe choice. Patrick resisted that quietly. He took Roadhouse, a violent, physical role that asked for bruises instead of applause. He performed his own fight scenes. Took real hits. Broke ribs. Injured his knee again. Critics were divided. Audiences were not. They saw range. He saw damage accumulating. Then came Ghost. At first, the studio doubted him. The role was softer. Grief-driven. Stillness mattered more than force. Others were considered. He auditioned anyway. When the room went silent, the decision was made. The film became a phenomenon. Not because of spectacle, but because of restraint. His performance carried loss without explanation. Love without possession. The chemistry with Demi Moore felt lived in. And when he insisted on casting Whoopi Goldberg, it changed the film's tone and legacy. Her performance would go on to win an Academy Award. His would earn another Golden Globe nomination. By the early 1990s, Patrick Swayze was everywhere. Point Break showed him as a rebel philosopher. Magazines crowned him. Studios competed for him. He had reached the summit. But the cost was invisible. Years of injuries. Alcohol creeping deeper into daily life. Pressure to remain invincible. The body that once moved with ease now required recovery just to stand ready again. Success had come true. So had the toll. And while the world saw men at his peak, the cracks were already forming beneath the surface. The fall was not sudden. It was gradual. Almost polite. While the public still saw confidence, the private damage kept stacking quietly behind closed doors. The first crack came earlier than most realized. In 1983, while his career was gaining traction, Patrick Swayze lost his father to a heart attack. The man he admired most was gone without warning. There was no pause for grief. Work continued. The drinking began. Alcohol did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as relief. One drink to sleep. Another to quiet the noise. Over time, it became a companion he could not outrun. Bar fights followed. Reckless driving. A reputation for volatility that never reached headlines, but followed him quietly from room to room. Physically, his body was failing him piece by piece. Years of self-inflicted punishment through stunts and overwork caught up. Roadhouse left him bruised, fractured, and limping. Knees weakened. Ribs cracked. Pain became routine. He turned down major roles not because of choice, but because his body could no longer recover fast enough. In the early 1990s, he attempted to regain control. During the filming of City of Joy, he stopped drinking altogether. The environment was dangerous. Protests erupted on set. Firebombs were thrown over walls. Tension was constant. When the film failed commercially, The sobriety did too. The bottle returned. Then came another blow. In 1994, his older sister took her own life after years battling severe mental illness. There are losses that fracture time itself. This was one of them. Grief deepened his dependence. Rehab followed. Then relapse. A cycle that repeated itself with growing exhaustion. In 2000, the recklessness nearly turned fatal. While piloting his private plane over Arizona, a malfunction forced an emergency landing. Witnesses reported alcohol on board. Smoking residue was later blamed for oxygen failure in the cockpit. He survived. No charges followed. But the message was unmistakable. His habits were no longer private. They were lethal. Marriage suffered under the weight of it all. Lisa Niemi endured years of uncertainty, fear, and silence. In 2003, she left. Not out of anger, but survival. The separation forced a reckoning. Patrick entered rehab again. This time, something shifted. He stopped drinking. She returned. For a brief moment, stability returned. Then the body spoke louder than denial ever could. In 2007, while filming The Beast, he felt a burning in his stomach that would not fade. Food became unbearable. Weight dropped rapidly. His eyes turned yellow. Doctors ran tests that offered no soft landing. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Already spread to the liver. He looked at his wife and said he was a dead man. From that moment on, time moved differently. He continued working. Endured chemotherapy. Filmed long hours. Smiled for cameras. And somehow, still smoked. The habits that shaped his downfall refused to release him, even now. The man who once moved with perfect control was now fighting for days. And the clock was unforgiving. When the news became public, it didn't arrive as shock. It arrived as recognition. America had watched Patrick Swayze slow down for years without knowing why. The leaner frame. The quieter interviews. The pauses that felt heavier than before. When he confirmed he was battling pancreatic cancer, the reaction was immediate and deeply personal. Morning shows stopped speaking in headlines. Entertainment outlets shifted tone. This was no longer about a star fading. It was about a man confronting something most Americans associated with silence and finality. In the United States, pancreatic cancer carried a specific weight. It was known as fast, unforgiving, rarely survivable. Patrick did not dramatize it. He spoke calmly. Sometimes with humor. Sometimes with visible fear. That restraint mattered. Older audiences recognized it. This was how their fathers spoke. How they themselves had learned to endure. Abroad, the response was quieter but no less intense. In Europe and Asia, Dirty Dancing and Ghost replayed on television with renewed attention. Articles focused less on box office numbers and more on longevity. How a single performance could travel decades across borders. How physical storytelling aged better than spectacle. What stood out most was what he chose to keep doing. He continued working. Continued filming The Beast. Continued showing up. In American culture, that choice resonated deeply. Not because it was brave in a cinematic way, but because it felt familiar. Work as dignity. Routine as resistance. There was no grand farewell tour. No awards campaign. No public reconciliation with the industry. Instead, there were reruns. Quiet tributes. And a growing realization that Patrick Swayze had never been a product of hype. He had been a constant. Critics began reassessing his work. Not as genre films. Not as romantic fantasies. But as studies in restraint. In masculinity that did not shout. In movement that carried emotion without explanation. When he passed, the headlines were brief. The reactions were not. Social spaces filled with shared memories. First dances. Late-night rewatches. Parents explaining to children why these films mattered. In the end, America did not mourn a celebrity. It mourned a familiar presence leaving the room. And the silence he left behind felt earned. In the final months, everything became smaller. The rooms. The days. The future. Patrick Swayze was no longer chasing roles or proving range. He was holding on to moments. Chemotherapy took its toll. Strength faded. Weight dropped. But the routine remained. He worked when he could. Rested when he couldn't. There was no performance left in it. Only resolve. At home, on the ranch, life slowed to the pace of breathing and quiet conversations. When the hospital suggested the end was near, his family brought him back home. Not to fight. To rest. In his own bed. Surrounded by familiar air. His wife, Lisa Niemi, was there when the time came. Her last words to him were simple. I love you. His last words echoed the same. There was nothing left to explain. He died at 57. Too young by any measure. Yet his story never felt unfinished. What he left behind was not perfection. It was persistence. A body trained to endure. A man who never separated art from effort. Dirty Dancing still plays because it reminds people of first chances. Ghost endures because it speaks to loss without fear. Even Roadhouse, rough and unapologetic, reflects a refusal to be defined by one note. After his passing, reassessment followed naturally. Critics spoke differently. Fans watched again with older eyes. They noticed the restraint. The stillness. The way he let silence do the work. He was never the loudest man in the room. He was the one people remembered afterward. His legacy also carries a warning. About addiction that doesn't announce itself. About habits that feel manageable until they aren't. About the cost of pushing a body past what it can give back. But more than anything, Patrick Swayze left proof that masculinity could be gentle. That strength could move instead of strike. That dignity didn't require applause. If his story brought back a memory, a dance, or someone you once watched these films with, share it. We read every comment. Some lives end quietly. But their echoes stay.